Welcome to Masters in Parenting, a podcast from Chicago Parent Magazine. I'm your host, Hillary Bird.
Today we're talking about social media and parenting through a social media generation. Today we have Paul Oren, who's a communication professor at Valparaiso University. He has taught classes in social media. He's taught classes in a lot of journalism, but he's also been asked by his university and by high schools in the area near Valparaiso to talk to kids about social media and their best practices, to talk to athletes about how they should be using social media. So we're going to pick his brain today. Paul is also a journalist and works with a lot of athletes who use social media and a lot of kids who are athletes who use social media on a daily basis. So we're going to talk to him today about his ideas in parenting social media kids. Welcome, Paul.
It's my pleasure to be here, Hillary, and thank you to all who are listening. And this is it's a fun topic. It's like the equivalent of you're teaching somebody to cook, but you're also reminding them not to put their hand on the stove, right? Like it can burn you, but you still need to use a stove to cook, and the stove is an important tool. It's just when you put your hand on it, it burns. And so if social media is an important tool, it should be used all the time. But when you put your hand on it, it can be bad.
Right. That's absolutely true. Now, we'll start with, you and I did not grow up with social media.
And thank God for that.
Right. So we can't look to our parents to say, hey, how did you guide us through this? Or, I even think about, I have a 16-year-old nephew. When he was born, Facebook didn't exist, and Twitter didn't exist, and Snapchat and Instagram. None of that was even on anybody's mind. So, we're kind of learning along with our kids.
So what's interesting about that is I talked to my mother about, because I'm always fascinated by how technology has changed over generations, right? Because, this is the big wave for this generation right now, but there were other big waves. And my mother will talk about the party line telephone that she had. That they didn't have a telephone. You had to wait. It was her, like she didn't have a great childhood. She lived in a, kind of a tough part of Milwaukee, but it was her and her house, and I think like 6 other houses all shared a telephone with one another. And so if you wanted to make a call, you had to wait until somebody else was off the phone. And she said one of her favorite things as a child was very quietly picking up the phone in her house and listening in to the other phone conversations of all the other people. And I thought that's not all that dissimilar to social media today. What I find hilarious about my mother, though, is she's 63 years old and uses Facebook religiously, but she's 63, so like the rules of decorum and all that don't really apply to her. She's not worried about her professional standards or anything like that. She's retired. She sits at in a campground in the Wisconsin Dells, and you know what? She's going to go out with her friends and have a good time. She tweets about it or whatever, and it's interesting. So the older you get, the less you have to worry about that. The younger you get, the more I think we need to worry about practices and boundaries and things like that.
Sure. What kind of practices and boundaries do you think that parents need to start with, and at what age do you start with, okay, we're going to allow you to have this social media account, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but here's where we need to hold you back. What kinds of hold you back things do parents need to keep an eye out for?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important for parents of any kind to monitor what's going on at their schools, because that's where I think you start to learn a lot when you're a kid, right? When you finally, even at 5 or 6, when suddenly you're outside your parents' grasp 24/7, you're not there all the time. And I'm not saying that you should give your kid, a 5-year-old, a Twitter account. You should not. That's not what I'm saying. But I can remember, hearing stories from my mother now and father when I would come home when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, and I would tell them about things that I heard at school, and they realized, well, we probably got to start telling them about that, and we probably got to start talking about this, and so I, when a bunch of kids start getting social media accounts or whatever, or maybe there's that one kid whose parents are a bit more early adopters or innovators when it comes to technology, and all of a sudden, your kid's best friend is all on Instagram. Maybe it's time to talk about what Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or any of those things may be. I do think that just having open communication with children is great. Again, a lot of the way that I teach at Valpo is I use personal examples. And I think it's the best way to. It's maybe not what worked for everybody, but it's what worked for me. My mother was very open with me about TV shows or music or whatever, and this was the social media of my generation was MTV, I guess. She never restricted me from watching that. The only thing she ever restricted me from was watching the movie Purple Rain with Prince. I don't know why. To this day, I haven't seen it because my mom told me I can't. She told me I can't 30 years ago. But, I think if you just have open conversation with your children, I think that's great because you're letting them know what's out there or whatever. I think if you tell kids, hey, you're free to do a lot of this stuff, we're going to just watch you a little bit, that's fine. If you tell them you can't, well, then they rebel, right? I mean, isn't that kind of how it works a little bit? So when is a good age? I think probably, it's getting younger and younger, right?
Sure.
The whole idea of what childhood is has changed immensely. Kids today are dealing with a faster rate of maturing, and maybe maturing I'm putting in quotations, but they're dealing with a faster rate of growing up than we did, and maybe that's because of the music that's being geared toward kids now, or movies or shows or whatever, the media in general being geared towards them more. I think that I don't think it's a good idea to hide this stuff from children because they're going to learn it somewhere. One of their friends is going to have Instagram, one of their friends is going to have Snapchat, one of their friends is going to have Facebook. And if you pretend that you live in a shelter where, no, my friends aren't going to have this, then suddenly they're going to find it out from somewhere else. And then they're probably going to find it out in ways that you're not prepared for them to.
Sure. The bigger problem, too, with kids right now is when they get, when they have social media accounts, whether they're monitored or not, you have, I guess, playground bullying going on.
Yeah,
on social media.
big problem.
And with that, that's a problem at a younger age, and the problems with social media grow obviously as you're getting through there. When you're talking about something like bullying, do you feel that monitoring and as you said, watching and having those open communications, is that the best way to watch your kids through, how they're reacting?
Yeah, so this is kind of like a double-edged sword a little bit because, I was bullied a little bit in high school. My freshman year, I think, I took the city bus to school, and there was an upperclassman who took the city bus, and he was he bullied me a lot, just saying terrible things or whatever, just being a brat, an older guy or whatever. But I only ever had to deal with that kid in the 30 minutes it took me to go to school and the 30 minutes it took me to come home. He would throw snowballs at me and stuff like that. And in one day, I think I finally told him what to go do with himself, and then we were fine. And I actually, today at 38, I just feel sorry for the guy,
Sure.
But anyway, my point here is that yes, I was bullied a little bit, but before social media, my parents never knew that I got bullied in high school. I told them this story several years ago, and they were shocked. They're like, "You never said anything." No one's gonna broadcast that they are getting bullied, right? I don't. It was embarrassing to me that I was getting bullied. I should be a popular kid. I shouldn't be getting bullied, And, so the difference now is that it is being broadcast. It is being seen, And obviously we're seeing it affect people a lot, the more they get bullied. There's a whole television show about this, 13 Reasons Why, and that is that's a whole nother podcast for a whole nother day about whether or not you should watch that show, whether or not that show is good, whether or not that show is something you should talk about with your children and all of that. And you can find someone else to talk about that one. But that said, social media, it is being broadcast, and there is a lasting impact, both the bullying and obviously we'll get to, things that people put out there themselves that are damaging. But, I think it can be tough for kids. So I think it's important for maybe parents to try to figure out what is being said about their children on social media. how to go about doing that without being a complete helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent or whatever the term is that we're going to apply to that. It's one of those things that I think that don't be ambivalent to the fact that social media is a thing. Pay attention to it. Talk to your children about it. Make sure you know what sites they're on. Look at their phones. There's all sorts of different things now. I mean, you can put things on the phone so you can see their screens and all of that, I think, and there's all of those things there. I think parents or anyone who hides from social media and pretends that it's not going to affect them, that's where the real problem is. Just be open and have open dialogue about it. You can have the same conversations about social media that you have about smoking, that you have about drugs, that you have about alcohol. If you just ignore it and say it's never a thing or whatever, then, they're going to find it somewhere. I'm not saying line up shots of, different alcohol for your 10-year-old and say, try this and realize it's terrible for you. But I just think if you pretend it doesn't exist, they're going to go find it somewhere else. If you're open about it with everybody, then you have a better chance of heading off things as they arise because you have open dialogue with your child and you kind of see where their thoughts are.
Sure. Well, and I think too, like you said, bullying is very different because it is so very public.
Yeah, now it is with cyberbullying and all of that. Yes.
Right. Very much so. Then, nobody except probably the bus driver knew at the time that you were being bullied.
Yeah.
On a bus. None of your friends, nobody else at school.
Yeah, and even that, we would sit in the back of the bus and he would just mumble things to me for like a half hour and it was miserable. And if I put headphones on, he would sit behind me and just like it was awful. It was terrible.
Sure.
And but again, it was segmented to that 30 minutes each way, and I'm sure his parents never knew that he was a terrible human being, and my parents, you don't offer up that information, Right. Some people maybe do, but I didn't offer it up. I didn't want to tell anybody about it, and then one day in front of some of my friends, I snapped on this guy and they had no idea where this angst was coming from, and neither really did I. And then at the end of it, I was like, well, that felt good. I don't advise that either, so.
Of course. Now, we've got to talk to you about, even when what you put out there isn't necessarily bullying to a specific person today, paying attention to what is out there, and even as parents are starting to get to an age where they're now in the workplace and paying attention to what they had as their social media accounts when they were in high school, because now high schoolers of the Twitter generations and early Facebookers are in they're in their 20s, they're in we're not quite 30 yet, but they're in their 20s. That they're getting to a point where they can go back and we've seen it recently with athletes, we've seen it in Hollywood, that you can go back and take a look at what people have written on Twitter, and you have a what you say in high school and even middle school, but what you say on social media doesn't go away.
No, it doesn't. The internet is written in pen. It's not, it's written in ink. It's not written in pencil. And once you put it up there, it's out there. And there are a couple different things you can do. There's a lot of different social media scrubbing tools. We've talked about one of them, Tweet Delete, as one that is kind of made the rounds. There's other ones for Instagram. There's ones for Facebook. There's ones for all these different kind of sites that are out there. Snapchat kind of scrubs itself. After 24 hours, if you put a story up, it kind of goes away. And Snapchat's one of those things that if I send somebody a message or something like that and they screenshot it, it alerts me. But so now that I know that person has screenshotted something I sent them, but they still have it.
Sure.
So I think people get a false sense of security there, like, oh well, because it'll alert me that it's screenshot, they won't do it. Well, they might do it. And now that you sent a photograph or you sent some gossip about somebody else or something like that will go away the second you look at it. When you send a message to somebody after they see it, it goes away immediately, unless of course they screenshot it. And now you're in trouble there. So in anything, even on Tweet Delete or any of these other things, if you put it out there, it could be saved immediately. right? And there's some questions that we'll get to later on, questions from people who are chimed in, and one of them kind of talks a little bit about that. But as soon as you put information out there, I can right click save, and now I've got it. I've got this information, and that can be, in athletics we call it bulletin board material. So you can take it down immediately, but I've already saved it, and you don't even know that I've saved a tweet or that I've saved an Instagram picture or saved a Facebook post, and now I've printed it out, I put it up on my locker room, I put it in wherever, or it's juicy gossip that you've put out there, or you're tweeting emotionally about something, and it can be a real problem. Tweet delete, I want to make note, it's a great thing. You can use it to scrub. If you don't know what's out there, you can set a time period. You can go from here until a certain age or a certain time period, and you can just scrub everything. But the problem is it'll only scrub 3,200 tweets at a time. It can only go that far back, and so you'd actually have to run the program multiple times if you wanted to go back. I've probably tweeted over 20,000 times or something like that. So it would be a long day in the office if I'm trying to scrub all of those tweets. Another thing you can do, and this is something that, at least for Twitter, because Twitter is the one that I use the most, and Facebook, you can also do this. You can actually download your history. You can go on the app and you can download all of your tweets. So for Twitter, what it does is it gets sent to you, gets emailed to you in an Excel spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I downloaded it, and then I just hit find on Excel and just typed in words that I wouldn't have wanted, swear words, suggestive words, anything like that. Because this came along later in my life, I was 28 when I got on Twitter, I was smart enough to not have put a lot of this stuff out there. But I would think that anyone who is in that mode when they were in high school, when they were on Twitter, I would download your tweets and I would look at that, just put different words in. I think it's unconscionable that professional athletes and people in Hollywood and all of that have gotten to the point that they're at, and they don't have someone who's scrubbed their social media for them. I don't understand that. Now, there's two different conversations we can have. We can talk about how, James Gunn from the Marvel movies, or the baseball players, Josh Hader was really the big one at the night of the All-Star game. We can argue these guys are terrible human beings because of what they said. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think they're morons for not deleting this stuff, or the team that they work for, the movie studio they work for. Everybody out there, you want a job in social media now, there's got to be an influx of these jobs now of working for a professional organization that's just in charge of scrubbing the social media of your employees, I would think. Now, what does that mean for parents and children? Again, if you have an open line of dialogue with your children, I would think you'll probably have a pretty good idea of what kind of stuff they're putting out there. If you don't have an open line of dialogue with your children, you probably need to be a little bit even more intrusive, kind of looking and seeing what they have out there and trying to figure out how can you do this, and maybe you try to figure out what their passwords are. That's tough though, because do you want to live in a world where you're demanding of your children, give me your passwords to your social media accounts? There's got to be at least a level of trust there, but if they continually violate that trust, then you've got decisions to make.
Sure. Well, and that was a question I was going to ask, if you thought that sharing passwords was a good idea. And that might be age specific too.
I think it is.
A
12
12-year-old, in that case, entering into social media in late tweens, early teens, that you're able to say, okay, we're going to share a password. It's going to be, the name of the cat. And I'm not going to use it all the time, but I need to make sure that we have some parental control over what is out there with your name on it. Because your name, I helped pick your name.
Yeah.
We've got the same last name, kid. We need to make sure that that what you're putting out there doesn't not only isn't going to ultimately hinder your future, but also you don't want anybody coming back and saying, well, your kid said this, and this about a protected group, and now, what does that say to you about you as a parent?
Yeah, I think parents always should remember what it was like to grow up and how it would feel if their parents had working knowledge of every single thing they were doing. I mean, I can remember as a kid, my mom always being like, "Do you have a girlfriend at school yet? Do you like girls? Do you have a girlfriend at school yet?" and everything. And I think I was attracted to a girl in kindergarten, but it was like embarrassing to say that, And so like I just, growing up as you're learning as a kid, when you're learning yourself and you're finding yourself, it can be scary and nerve-wracking and fun and exciting all at the same time. And if you compound the fact that you've got to worry about your parents, being able to hop into your Facebook account and all that stuff and see the messages, I would think, again, Hillary, as you pointed out, age specific would be good. I think probably anything prior to high school, you should probably be sharing passwords, I would think. Depending on the maturity level of kids, probably 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I think at that point, kids mature at different rates, different levels, and I think at that point you're probably in a case-by-case situation. By the time you get to high school, I think you should probably be monitoring their social media a little bit. At that point, you kind of want them to start maturing and growing up on their own, and checking in on their Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and all that is probably a bit intrusive, but also by the time you get to high school is probably when that's the most stuff that's going to happen that you'd have to worry about, in terms of whether we're talking about getting into alcohol, or whether we're talking about bullying, or whether we're talking about different things like that, the whole sexting thing and all of those sorts of things that are out there, all these different kinds of divisions on the road of where these things can go that can be negative. My number one best practice here is the top of the sheet I'm looking at. We talk about best practices. I just think open dialogue with your child. You're going to know your child better than anybody else in the world is going to know them. You should, right? and that's the case. Then you should know when things are going north or south. And I got friends that I grew up with who they were going south, and their parents refused to acknowledge that. So I think it's important. Pay attention to who they are as a person, because a lot of times who they are as a person is probably going to be who they are on social media to an extent, but you never know. There's also people who they look one way, they sound one way, and then they get on social media. And if anything in the political sphere has taught us this over the last couple of years, we see that people have exploded in social media ways, different than how they appear in person.
I think it's important to note too that there are some key differences in various social media platforms, and I'm sure that some that I might not even have an account in, but obviously you've got Twitter and Facebook, Instagram and Snapchat, and they're all a little bit different. Talk about what makes some of them really good. How are some of these beneficial to make sure that your kids have access to them?
Yeah, so Instagram is probably one of the most popular among children now, because it's just pictures of themselves, right? And who doesn't love taking a picture of themselves and showing it off? And you get likes, and that's a huge thing. For parents who are not in the social media game, I would tell you two things. One, I should have said this at the beginning. It's a couple years old, but there's a documentary called Generation Like by PBS. Frontline did this, which really explains how the youth are handling a lot of these things. And it is a fascinating documentary that showcases how children are using all of the marketing tools that have been thrown at them through social media and using them back on their own friends to market themselves and have their own personal brand. And so Instagram becomes a big part of that, and Snapchat becomes a part of that as well, where people are actually branding themselves. I have students, college students, who tell me that they themselves or friends of theirs, their younger sister, younger brother, will put a photograph up on Instagram, and if it doesn't have 400 likes within the first 2 hours, they take the picture down. I put a photograph up this morning of myself. I think I have 25 likes, and it's been up for 6-7 hours, and it'll probably top out at 65 likes. I think 900 people follow me on Instagram. So less than 10% of the people like the photograph, but I also don't care if people like it. Now we get a dopamine hit, I think it is, or endorphin hit,
sure,
every time we get a like. The reward center gets triggered, which is why Instagram is very much something that kids love, because you are physically getting liked when that happens. Twitter, the same thing, but Twitter is a way to vent about things. Twitter is a way to send memes to people. Twitter is a way for me, Twitter is a way to spread news and to keep up on what's going on in the world and all of that. But I think children use Twitter for different reasons, obviously. Kids are not using Facebook all that often.
They aren't.
Facebook is what their parents are using.
Right.
The fastest growing demographic, I think, on Facebook right now is grandparents, because grandparents want to see what their grandkids are doing.
Right.
But the grandkids are on Snapchat now.
Right.
And they're messaging each other back and forth. They do it every day. They get Snapchat streaks, which is, if Hillary, if you and I send a message to each other, a video message to each other every single day for, 200 days, we would have a Snapchat streak of 200. What is the point of that? There is no point of that, other than it's cool to brag to your friends about, look, I got a streak of 200 with this person. We've figured out a way to make daily life a game, and Snapchat and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook has become, as the documentary says, the game of likes. And we're trying to win the game of likes. Facebook is one of those things that it's boring, I'm going to probably sound a bit like a creep here, but as a professor, we are friends with some of our students on Facebook. We work with them for 4 years or whatever. And I was surprised. I think I had one of my students, he's joining the newspaper that I am the faculty advisor for, and we were friends on Facebook or whatever, and the photograph that he had up was a very young photograph of him. I was like, oh, that's what he looked like when he was a kid. So I looked at the photograph, and it was uploaded in 2013. And then I looked at like his other photographs, and none of them, he has not uploaded a photograph to Facebook since 2013. Just 5 years. He hasn't. I don't go through all my students' Facebooks to see when they upload their photographs, but I was struck by how young he looked in that picture. They're just not on Facebook very often. It's not cool anymore. Facebook isn't cool. Why? Because we're on it. I'm 38. I'm on Facebook. So it's not cool anymore. My mom is 63. It's not cool anymore. And but Instagram and Snapchat are the cool things. And there will be something else that's cool someday soon, and Snapchat won't be cool anymore. I tell my college students this all the time. It freaks them out when I say, look, Facebook was amazing in 2007. 2005 is when it came out. 2007 is when it went public. Everybody was on Facebook. You talked about it all the time. Everybody, hey, Facebook me. That was a big thing. And they're like, they can't believe that Facebook was ever that popular. They all have a Facebook account because they think they're supposed to have one, because we're all supposed to have one. But they're all on Snapchat. Hey, snap me later on. And I'm like, guys, 5 years from now, Snapchat's going to be as irrelevant to the rest of the world as Facebook is to you right now. No, it'll never be like that. It's going to be like that because something else will come along.
Because we couldn't have imagined 5 years ago something overtaking Facebook.
No.
And something did.
Yeah, now we say things like tweet at me, or I did it for the gram, or snap me. What does that mean? Marty McFly is freaked out when he comes to 2015, there's all sorts of different social media platforms. Snapchat is the one, even for me, I don't use it very often because people my age don't use it very often. There's a theory out there called the diffusion of innovations theory, which states how willing we are to accept new technology. I would put myself as an innovator, early adopter, early majority, late majority, and laggard. Laggard being someone who I don't want anything to do with this. They maybe have a flip phone, something like that. And so for me, I was early on MySpace before it was popular, and I remember talking to my friends, hey, are you on MySpace? And they're like, no, that's for 14-year-olds. And I was like, not really. It's going to be big. And MySpace was big for a bit. And then I said to my friends, I was 25 when Facebook came out of college. I said to my friends, hey, you got to get on this Facebook thing. I just started teaching. I got a .edu email address. You got to check this out. And they're like, no, that's for 18-year-olds. And I'm like, guys, you're missing the boat. So that said, at 38, I look at Snapchat and I think, it's not for me,
Do you find, as you are a reporter and you cover college kids and high school kids, do you find and look for the social media accounts of the athletes that you cover?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, not being a creep, you've got, for me as a reporter, I've got to find them where they live, right? The high school athletes they're not going to go pick up the hard copy newspaper tomorrow. They're just not, right? By and large, they're not getting up like I did every morning and rode my bike to the newspaper vending machine and put my 50 cents in there and got the paper, took it home and memorized every word in it. You know, almost every reporter that works at a newspaper has a story like that of how they got into it. But even I think most people aren't quite like that, and certainly not kids these days. They'll look up online. But even then, you know, you've got to spoon feed a lot of people the information. We live in a world now where information comes to them. They don't go to the information. Mm-hmm. So I've got to figure out the best way to reach out to these people. And so I find their Twitter handles. And so instead of saying Reese Crossan throws a 50-yard touchdown pass to Jesse Harper, I'm going to say at @rcrossan7 throws a 50-yard touchdown pass to @J Harper Valpo for life, or whatever their names are, something like that. And my hope then is that they favorite it, they retweet it, the rest of the people in their network see it. Then at the end of it, put a link to the story and hope that they all click on it and find it and all of that. And then they all retweet it and share it. And I hope that we boost our page numbers and page clicks and ad revenue and all of that. But the message and the reason why we bring all of this up is because, like, I'm just a newspaper reporter and I am searching out your children, trying to figure out a way to get them to click on my newspaper so I can get them to be inundated with the ads from. And while I suppose you can call me a social media expert, I think I just use it. And so people who get paid lots of money to figure out how to get your kids to click on things are also doing the same thing. Generation Like, again, great documentary, will tell you how they're targeting your children. And I target your children. You know, it's my job to find people at a young age. I just taught an advertising section in one of my classes the other day, and I asked my students, my college students, what does "will pick you up" mean? And they all pointed out that it was enterprise. And I said, how do you guys know that? You're not old enough to rent a car. You're not. You can't rent a car till you're 25. They're all 18. And I said, but you know what? For the next 7 years, you're going to hear "will pick you up." And when it's time to rent a car, that's who you're going to go with. So it's all about brand loyalty and hammering them. So I'm going to tweet at these people and try to make sure that they understand NWI is the newspaper to go to, or Chicago Parent Magazine is a magazine to read, any of that.
If you were finding a athlete that you cover and you happen to see a tweet in the same vein as what was found with athletes and directors in Hollywood recently, what is your first course of action? Because in this case, you're talking about 14, 16-year-old kids who maybe had just put something out there. And do you call a coach and say, hey, this is out there. Do you know that your athlete said this recently? Do you report on it? I know this is a really tough question.
It's the hardest question. It's the hardest question because is it my job as a reporter to police the high school athletes that we cover? But then they're also kids. This is a hard question. Like, you know, covering high schools is the hardest thing because when they're really good, we hype them up. And when they're really bad, like they make 3 errors in a game and cost their team the championship, we try not to mention them because we don't want to ruin anyone's day or make kids cry or anything like that. Or to put it more delicately, we don't want to take the worst moment of their lives and try to profit off of it.
Right.
High school athletes. I would argue that that's almost all we do at a higher level. You know, we build them up so we can knock them down, right? I mean, look at professional athletes, what we do to a lot of these people. You know, Johnny Manziel, we built him up for a year and a half. This guy's amazing. This guy's great. And then he started falling apart, and we reveled in it. Tim Tebow, we built him up for years at Florida, won national championships. He gets to the NFL, he can't complete a pass, and we love it. And so, and God forbid, Tim Tebow ever gets caught doing any kind of drugs anywhere somewhere. God, the world would love it. It would be all over everything. So for me, it's a great question you ask. I don't deal with a lot of terrible things. A lot of times when I'm interviewing athletes, there's a couple schools in the area that I work in that really hate each other, right? And every once in a while there will be some good, a good quote will come my way about how we're gonna beat them. They're terrible. They're awful. And it's like, God, I really want to run that. And then I think to myself, well, what if I put that in the story? Good luck ever having a coach from that team ever talk to me again. Good luck ever getting interview access at any, And so then it becomes a question of, is it my job to make sure I continually get access to these people, or is it my job to present truth as it unfolds in front of me? So if a kid puts something terrible out on social media, I'd like to think I'm a good person that can look myself in the mirror. So I'm probably not retweeting it or whatever, and I'm probably sending a well-timed text message to a coach that said, hey, you should probably check into this. But that's me telling you all I'm a good person. There's a lot of other reporters out there who will look at that and say, yeah, let's burn them. Let's hang them. If I retweet this, I'm going to get so many clicks off this. So Josh Hader, the guy from the Milwaukee Brewers, tweeted these terrible things when he was 17 years old. He's 24 now. He tweeted these terrible things. There's no justification for what he said, right? I want to make that clear. There's no justification for what he said. But who's going to look for it? Like, it's like people who win $50,000 on a scratch-off lottery ticket. We talk about that they won that scratch-off lottery ticket, but how much money did they spend on all the other scratch-off lottery tickets that they didn't win? So somebody somewhere sat down, went through Twitter, and went through how many athletes to get to Josh Hader, right? I mean, we got Josh Hader, we got Trey Turner, we got Sean Newcomb, 3 young players in Major League Baseball who all said terrible things. But how many... That's an odd existence for someone to sit there and just go through all of this stuff.
I think, too, that those people exist is what parents really need to pay attention to noting. And like you said, that, every job should have somebody paying attention to, what is said on the social media accounts of their employees. Whether or not they do, you're pretty sure at this point that someone is going to exist to pay attention to those for a job candidate. In addition to doing a background check, hey, we're going to go see what your social media account looks like. Because what you said at 17 might be very important to, whether we are going to hire you because of the clientele that we have, if we're an advertising business, who are our clients? If we are an accounting firm, who are our clients? And I think they want to make sure that if they can find it, their clients can find it.
I think there's really no analogy as to what's going on today to anything that we dealt with when we were growing up. There's nothing that we can point to and say, well, this is very similar to that. It's a fundamental shift of how parenting is happening because, you have to make sure that your children are not if they are putting terrible things out there, because that's a different conversation. If they are putting terrible things out there, that's a whole other thing you got to deal with. But making sure that even if your child is terrible, that they're not putting those things in a public forum, right? And it's hard. It's a tough thing. But I do think it's important again to have that open line of dialogue to make sure that you just pay attention that these things can hurt you. One of the questions we got here is how to actually get teens to understand that you don't really know who's on the other end of the account. There's a great story it's a terrible story about a public relations woman named Justine Sacco, excuse me. And Justine she had like 150 followers on Twitter, and she was flying from London to South Africa, and she put out a tweet. I'm not gonna go through the tweet on here, but she put out a tweet that was racist in nature, but pretty horribly racist. And she put it out there, and she had 150 followers, and she probably thought that it was barroom humor for her. I mean, how many times do we hear these people say, well, that's how we talk in the locker room, and that's how we talk. Not in the locker room I've ever been in before. But so many times we kind of justify this. Well, stand-up comedians can say it, why can't I say it on Twitter? Well, it's different. It's just different. And so she sends this tweet, gets on an airplane, doesn't have social media for 15 hours, or however long the flight was. In that time, her tweet goes viral. Thousands and million people see it. She gets fired from her job while she's in the air. The company that she works for has to put out a statement. In no way, shape, or form is Justine's thoughts or actions conducive with what we think at our, all these different PR things have to happen. By the time she lands, her phone is blowing up, her friends are messaging her and all that. People are cheering on her demise in real time. There's great stuff. It's Justine Sacco, Sacco. It's all over. I mean, it's a great, great story. The New York Times did a great follow-up interview on her. And you never know who's on the other end of this stuff. She had 150 followers. She thought 150 people were going to see this, and that was it. Kids these days, they think that, I got 50 friends on Instagram. And I don't have my private settings out there, so I'm just going to put this out there. And even if you do have privacy settings out there, one of your friends is going to screenshot a photograph that you put up. I'm always surprised by the amount of underage drinking that I see on social media. And when I say I'm surprised, I mean I'm not surprised at all, but we should be surprised. Like, be smarter than that. A, don't do it. That's a whole other conversation.
Sure.
But B, don't try to tell me that you walking around with the red Solo cup is water. You're at a party and all of that stuff. And we've seen numerous high schools getting in trouble for, a bunch of athletes go to a party and there's a couple of people who aren't athletes who are at the party who are posting photographs because they don't have to worry about answering to a coach or answering to whatever. And we've seen players get suspended, players getting taken off the bus on their way to the state finals because they were busted for a photograph. There are different schools in the area that have policies in place that if you are photographed with what appears to be alcohol in your hand, you get a suspension. And I'm sure that there's legalities and all of that. But the point is that so many more people see what we put out there than we actually think. I look at my Twitter stats and the amount of followers I have versus the amount of impressions I get. There's far more impressions. People are seeing this content far more than just the amount of followers that you have. I've rambled for a bit there, but I hope that point makes sense.
No, that's actually perfect. And we wanted to talk about too, we did in the age of social media pose the question on Facebook of what kinds of dilemmas are parents having that they would like Paul to weigh in on. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the disappearance of snaps and that kind of thing. How does that the non-disappearance of some of this stuff and the inability to delete that kind of thing?
Can I put a tinfoil hat on for a second? Sure. Here's the thing that's tough is last I checked, I don't pay any money to Facebook to use their site. I don't pay any money to Twitter, I don't pay any money to Instagram, I don't pay any money to Snapchat. Their value comes from having access to my information, right? Whether that be my surfing habits on the web or who I'm friends with or any of that stuff, right? So that's the value that I give them. But I think we'd be naive to think that the information we give them that they don't own. Facebook owns everything I put on my Facebook account, right? All of the photographs that I have there, I've given them to Facebook for the right price of $0 a month. And so I can delete that stuff, but there's a website called Wayback Machine that you can get on, and you can actually find screenshots of what websites looked like back in the day. So whether it's an old blog that you had or it's an old version of Chicago Parent Magazine, whatever it may be, there's all sorts of stuff there. This information's there. I have to think, people who are G-chatting, on Google Chat, you don't think someone in Google is sitting there with a canister of Pringles and a Mountain Dew just kicking back and watching all these different chats that are coming through their server? I would be very leery about any information that I shared over social media in terms of, photographs or passwords or banking information or any of that stuff. It's just, I can't tell you how they're tracking it or where it is or anything like that, but we put this information out there, and then we're surprised when we find out that X website gets hacked or whatever, and all Wells Fargo gets hacked, or this gets hacked, or whatever. We give them this information for free. We don't pay to use these sites, so there's really no expectation of privacy, right? I mean, what are we paying? We're not paying for anything. We're just giving them all of our information. Instagram has all of our photographs. I think the flip side of that is, how much stuff do we keep stored on Facebook that we don't have ourselves? What if Facebook just shut down tomorrow? How many photographs do we have on there that, photographs from, your best friend's wedding that, you uploaded a bunch of photographs on Facebook, and then you deleted all those photographs, or you lost your old laptop or whatever. And it's on Facebook. If I ever need to see it, it's on Facebook. You don't pay for that site. It's just, they could shut it down tomorrow. Matter of fact, there was a website called Friendster, which was the first big social media site that it went through a couple different iterations, and finally it was pretty much out of sight in the US, but it was still huge in the Philippines. It was huge. Like 80% of their traffic came from the Philippines, I think. And one day people logged in and it just said, "We've shut down. You have 2 weeks to get your stuff off the site," and then it's gone forever. And just imagine, they didn't even have to give the 2 weeks. It's not a job. You don't have to give a 2-week notice when we're shutting down a social media site. That was a very long way to answer that. I'd be leery of any information we put on these sites that somebody, if I was running a political campaign, I would be in bed with every one of these social media sites to try to find out what my opponents had put on social media at any point. What dirt can I have on them? And that's just the start right there.
To wrap up, we'll answer a good question that we also got from Facebook. What are some ways that kids can use social media to promote kindness and to promote positive change?
I go back to that a little analogy I used at the beginning. Just because you can touch the stove and burn your hand doesn't mean the stove is a bad tool. Just because you can smother somebody with a pillow doesn't mean that a pillow is a bad thing. I am touched continuously by the amount of times I see a young person in peril. They need a liver transplant. Their parents were killed in a car accident, whatever. And people rise up with GoFundMe accounts or food calendars or anything on social media that you can have that can help generate some assistance for these people, right? It happens every day in Chicago. It happens all over the place that social media can be a very, very positive method for this. When I was a kid, I think one year I came home for my birthday and I said, "Mom, I don't want any birthday cake. Can you please send it to Ethiopia? They don't have any food there." I read something in class or something. I was thinking it was like 10. And my mom tells me that she cried her eyes out because I wanted to solve world hunger with my birthday cake. And the thing is that I couldn't solve world hunger with my birthday cake, but social media gives us a touch into places that maybe we can do a little bit more. And obviously it always costs money to do a little bit more, but social media helps a lot. And also just promoting kindness and positive change, just being a good person. And we don't need social media to be a good person. It just gives us another outlet to do it. And I think, to wrap up my whole thing here, the more open you are with your children about being a good person will probably lead to the more open that they're going to be on social media being a good person. Because right now, like it or not, social media is the avenue in which your child is going to promote their brand. And we are in a place today where everybody's got a brand. And let's make sure it's a good, positive brand, not a bad one.
Thank you, Paul Oren, for talking to us with Masters in Parenting from Chicago Parent Media. If you have any questions, please send them to us at podcast@chicagoparent.com.